The building only has 2 floors. I know because I've worked here for 3 years. I know every light switch, every squeaky floorboard, every corner that gets cold for no reason. I know this building the way you know your own face. So when the elevator panel lit up with a button for floor 3, I stood very still and did not press it. It was a Tuesday night in November. The rain had been coming down since 6 in the evening, the kind of rain that doesn't make noise so much as it makes a presence. A low, constant hiss that fills every silence. I was the only one in the building. Our company runs a data processing office, rows of computers, filing cabinets, drop ceilings, carpet that smells like old coffee. Nothing interesting. Nothing that should scare anyone. My job on the night shift was simple. Answer the emergency line if it rang. Run a backup on the servers at midnight. Lock up at 2 in the morning. I'd done it 40 or 50 times. I brought a sandwich, a thermos of tea, and a paperback novel. I settled in at the front desk on the ground floor, listened to the rain, and started reading. At 11:15, the power flickered. Just once. A single blink of darkness, maybe half a second. The emergency lights clicked on in the hallway, those pale green rectangles near the floor, and then the main lights came back. My computer screen rebooted. The clock on the wall stopped working. I checked my phone, 11:16. I assumed it was the storm. I went to the server room on the second floor to make sure nothing had tripped offline. Everything looked fine. The servers were humming their usual low hymn. The indicator lights were green. I stood there a moment, listening to the rain hitting the single high window above the server racks. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving from one end of the ceiling to the other. The sound of someone walking on a hard floor. Not the settling of a building. Not pipes. Footsteps. The weight distribution of a person taking one step, then another, pausing, then continuing. I told myself it was the roof. Debris from the storm. A branch. I am not a person who frightens easily, or at least, I wasn't then. I went back downstairs and sat at the front desk and picked up my book. But I couldn't read. I kept looking up at the ceiling. At 11:40, the elevator across the lobby made a sound. That mechanical groan it makes when it's been called. I looked up. The arrow above the elevator door was pointing up. I watched the doors slide open, the cab was empty, and then slide closed. I heard the cable system engage. The elevator was going up. I walked over and watched the floor indicator above the door. The needle moved from G to 2. Then it kept going. It stopped at a number that should not have existed. The number 3. The indicator held there. The elevator did not come back down. I stood in front of those closed doors for a long time. The building directory on the wall beside the elevator listed 2 floors. Ground, reception, administration. Second, server room, archives, maintenance. There was no third listing. There had never been a third listing. I had never, in 3 years, noticed a button for floor 3 inside that elevator cab. But I also could not remember the last time I'd looked carefully at the panel. I pressed the call button. I heard the cable system engage again. The elevator came back down to the ground floor and the doors opened. I stepped inside carefully, the way you step into a room where you think someone might be hiding. The cab was empty. I looked at the floor selection panel. There were 3 buttons. G, 2. And above them, slightly newer looking, with a smaller font, the number 3. I pressed G and let the doors close and stood there, not going anywhere, just standing. When the doors opened again I stepped out quickly. I sat back at the desk. I called my supervisor. No answer. I called the building's maintenance emergency line. It rang 11 times and disconnected. At midnight, I went to do the server backup as scheduled. I took the stairs. The stairwell only went to the second floor. At the top of the staircase there was the usual door to the server room hallway. Above it, where sometimes you see those green exit signs, there was nothing. Just ceiling. But while I was doing the backup, I heard the footsteps again. Directly above me. And this time they stopped in one place and stayed there. Just standing. Whatever it wasn't moving anymore. It was just standing in one spot on the floor above me, which was a floor that did not exist, and it was standing very still. Like it was listening. I finished the backup in 4 minutes when it usually takes me 12. I do not remember going back down the stairs. I remember sitting at the front desk with all the lights I could reach turned on, watching the elevator, which did not move again until I left the building at 2 in the morning. The last thing I did before leaving was walk over to the elevator one more time. I pressed the call button. The doors opened. I shone my phone light at the panel. There were only 2 buttons. G and 2. The button for floor 3 was gone. There was a small rectangular patch of slightly cleaner metal where it had been. Like something had been removed. But the rest of the panel was dusty the way old things get dusty when nobody touches them for a long time. Like the button had been there for years. I handed in my resignation the next morning. I told my supervisor I was leaving for personal reasons. He said he understood. Then he paused and said, "And I have thought about this every day since," he said. "Did anything happen last night? On your shift?" I asked him what he meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The person who had your shift before you. 3 years ago. Before you started. She left the same way. Same night of the week. Same weather." I asked him what happened to her. He said he didn't know. He said she'd left a note on the desk that just said, "Don't take the elevator." She'd never been heard from again. I thought about that elevator going up on its own. I thought about those footsteps overhead. I thought about how I had pressed G and stood inside that cab and waited, and how the doors had opened again onto the lobby. And then I thought about something I had not let myself think about until that moment. The elevator ride back down had taken much longer than it should have. I had pressed G. The doors had closed. And there had been a pause, a long, quiet pause, before the cable system moved. Like the elevator had stopped at another floor first. Like the doors had opened somewhere else before coming back to me. I hadn't heard the doors open. I hadn't felt the cab stop. But I had felt, for just a moment, a change in the air. A coldness. A sense of density, the way a room feels when it's been closed for a very long time and something stale has built up inside it. And I had heard, barely audible under the sound of the rain, something that I told myself was mechanical noise. It had sounded like breathing. I watched myself on the monitor for 6 hours before I realized the person on the screen wasn't doing what I was doing. Let me explain. I worked the overnight security shift at a large commercial warehouse on the edge of town. The building stores industrial equipment, forklifts, pallet systems, heavy machinery parts. Enormous, dusty space. Row after row of steel shelving units 30 feet high. A few bare bulbs on long cords. The rest of it is shadow. The security booth is a small room at the building's entrance. 1 desk, 1 chair, 1 space heater, 8 monitors showing the feeds from 8 cameras around the building. I have done this job for 2 years. I know the monitors, I know the cameras, I know every dark corner this building has. The rain started at 9 in the evening. Hard rain, the kind that drummed on the warehouse's metal roof so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. I made coffee, checked the monitors, did my hourly walkthrough of the floor, and came back to the booth. Routine. Exactly like every other night. At 10:30 I noticed something on monitor 4. Camera 4 covers the main aisle, the long central corridor that runs the full length of the warehouse, about 200 feet, with shelving on either side. It's the camera with the best view. Wide angle, positioned up high, looking straight down the aisle. There was someone standing at the far end. My first thought was that someone had gotten in. It happens occasionally, homeless people looking for shelter, sometimes teenagers on a dare. I stood up from the desk. I looked at monitor 4 more carefully. The figure was standing motionless at the far end of the aisle, facing the camera. Tall. Still. I picked up my radio and called it in. While I was on the radio, I happened to glance at monitor 5, which shows the entrance area. And monitor 2, which shows the east wall. And monitor 6, which shows the area directly outside the security booth. Nobody on any of them. I did my walkthrough. Entered the main floor, walked the full length of the central aisle, checked every cross aisle and every corner. I was thorough. I have a system. I do not rush. 20 minutes, I checked everything. The warehouse was empty. The loading dock doors were locked. The emergency exits were sealed with their alarm bars intact. I came back to the booth and sat down. The figure was on monitor 4 again. Same position. Far end of the aisle. Facing the camera. Perfectly still. I went back out. I walked to the exact spot where the figure appeared to be standing on the monitor. There was nothing. I looked up at camera 4, waving my arms. On the monitor in the booth, I could see it from the doorway. My waving image appeared clearly in the camera's view, standing right where the figure had been. I went back to the booth. The figure was gone from the monitor. I was there instead, visible in the camera's image, standing in the spot where the figure had been, waving my arms. Then I sat back down. And I watched. At 11:10, the figure appeared again. Same spot. Same posture. But this time I did not get up. I watched monitor 4 and I also watched myself on monitor 7, which covers the security booth and shows me at my desk. I watched both screens at the same time. On monitor 7, me, sitting at my desk, facing the monitors, not moving. On monitor 4, a figure standing at the far end of the aisle. The figure on monitor 4 slowly turned its head to the left. On monitor 7, I saw my own head turn to the left at the exact same moment. I had not chosen to turn my head. I had been looking straight at the screens. But there on monitor 7 was my own image, turning to look left, and I had no memory of deciding to do it. I held very still. I stared at monitor 4. The figure at the end of the aisle was now facing left, looking down the cross aisle. Then it raised its right arm slightly. I looked at my right arm. It was resting on the desk, as I had left it. But on monitor 7, my image had raised its right arm. I stood up. Both figures, the one at the end of the aisle on monitor 4, and my image on monitor 7, stood up at the same time. Then I walked toward the door of the security booth. On monitor 4, the figure at the end of the aisle walked toward the camera, toward me. On monitor 7, my image walked toward the door. I stopped at the doorway. I did not go out onto the floor. Both figures stopped. I reached out and gripped the doorframe with both hands. On monitor 7, my image reached forward. Its hands were not gripping anything visible. The rain on the roof was very loud. I forced myself to look at camera 4's monitor one more time. The figure had moved. It was no longer at the far end of the aisle. It was closer. Much closer. Close enough that I could see more detail than I had seen before. It was wearing the same clothing I was wearing. The same jacket, the same dark pants. Its face was turned down slightly. It was standing about 6 feet outside the security booth door. I looked out the door. The warehouse floor was empty. I looked back at the monitor. The figure was looking up now. Looking directly into camera 4. And its face was my face. Not a copy. Not a resemblance. My face, but the expression was wrong. The eyes were open too wide. The mouth was set in a way I have never felt my own mouth sit. It looked like someone wearing my face but not knowing quite how to work it correctly. I closed and locked the security booth door. I did not open it again until my relief arrived at 6 in the morning. I did not watch the monitors. I sat in the corner of the small room, facing the door, with the space heater going and the rain hammering the roof. In the morning I reviewed the camera footage with the shift supervisor. We watched camera 4 from 9 in the evening to 6 in the morning. There was no figure in any of the footage. Not once. On camera 7, which covers the security booth, the footage showed me sitting at my desk all night without moving. No standing, no walking to the door, no gripping the doorframe. Just me, sitting, staring at the monitors. Sitting completely still for 9 hours. Not blinking once. The calls always came at 3 in the morning and they always sounded like my mother. I want to be clear about something. My mother passed away 4 years ago. I know what her voice sounds like. I grew up listening to it. There is no mistaking it for anyone else's voice in the world. The call started on my 3rd week working the overnight shift at a rural telephone relay station. It's an old job that still exists in certain parts of the country where cell service is unreliable. Someone has to monitor the lines through the night, reroute calls when there are outages, keep the equipment running. It is a quiet and solitary job, and I was told when I took it that the hardest part was not being scared, it was being bored. Nobody mentioned the calls. The station is a small concrete building at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by dense pine forest. The nearest town is 11 miles away. When it rains, and it rains often in that region, the sound of water on the pine needles creates a soft, layered roar that fills every frequency. You stop noticing it after a while. It becomes the baseline of silence. The first call came on a Wednesday. 3:02 in the morning. The line it came in on was line 7, which is a legacy trunk line, one of the old copper wire lines that almost nobody uses anymore. I was doing crossword puzzles and eating chips when the indicator light for line 7 lit up. I put on the headset and said, "Relay station. What is the nature of your call?" My mother said, "Oh, good. I knew you'd be there." I took the headset off. Put it on the desk. Sat with my hands on my knees for a minute. Then I put it back on. The line was still open. Quiet breathing. The sound of rain in the background of the call. "Hello," I said. She said, "Don't be frightened. I just wanted to hear your voice." I disconnected the line. I sat in the station until 6 in the morning with every light on and the door locked. I told myself it was a prank. Someone who'd known my mother. A strange coincidence. The mind playing tricks in the deep hours of the night when everything is slightly unreal. The second call came the following Wednesday. 3:01. Line 7 again. I almost didn't answer it. But it's my job to answer the lines. I picked up the headset. She said, "I need you to listen carefully tonight." I asked who was calling. She said my name. My childhood nickname. Something only she ever called me, something I'd never heard from another person in my adult life, a small private name from when I was very young. I said, "This isn't possible." She said, "I know. But it's still happening, isn't it?" The call quality was strange. There was that rain sound underneath everything, and something else, a deep, very low vibration, almost below hearing. The kind of frequency you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. And her voice was right. It was exactly her voice, the cadence of it, the way she softened certain words, the way her sentences went slightly up at the end even when she wasn't asking a question. I said, "Where are you calling from?" She said, "I don't know how to answer that." I said, "Why are you calling me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because you're the one who's there. You're alone. I wanted you to know you're not." I disconnected the line. The calls continued every Wednesday for 3 months. I started documenting them. I wrote down the time, the duration, the line, and everything said. I never told my supervisor. I never told anyone. Partly because I didn't know how to explain it. And partly because something in me looked forward to the calls in a way that frightened me more than the calls themselves. She never said anything frightening. She never threatened or warned or spoke in riddles. She spoke like herself. She asked about my health, whether I was sleeping well, whether I was lonely in the station. She said she missed me. She told me small things, that she was glad I'd gotten the job even if it was unusual, that she hoped I was eating properly. Ordinary, gentle things. But over the weeks, I began to notice something. She knew things she shouldn't have known. Small things at first. She asked about a specific book I'd recently bought, one I hadn't mentioned to anyone. She asked how my car was running. I'd had a problem with it the week before that I'd told no one about. She knew I'd changed the arrangement of furniture in my apartment. She knew I'd had a bad dream the previous night and told me not to worry about it. One night I asked her how she knew these things. She said, "I pay attention." I asked, "From where?" She said, "I'm close. I'm always close. You just can't see me from where you're standing." I asked her if she was at peace. Long pause. Then she said, very quietly, "I want you to check something for me. The equipment in the back room. The second rack, third shelf. There's a piece of hardware back there that doesn't belong. It's been there a long time. I need you to not touch it." I went to the back room. Second rack, third shelf. There was a small gray device tucked behind the legitimate relay equipment. Metal box, no labels, 2 cables running from it into the main line board. I had never noticed it before. I showed it to my supervisor in the morning. He went very pale when he saw it. He made a phone call. Within 4 hours, there were 3 men in the station who did not introduce themselves. They removed the device. They spent 2 hours examining the equipment. Before they left, one of them sat across from me and asked, in a very measured tone, how I'd known it was there. I said I'd noticed it during a routine check. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That device has been intercepting and rerouting calls on line 7 for approximately 5 years. It was placed there by parties we're still identifying." He paused. "Are you aware that line 7 is the line that was active at the time of a fatal accident involving a vehicle on the Route 9 overpass 4 years ago? The last call made from that location came in on line 7. I asked what the call had said. He looked at his hands. He said, "The call was incoherent. We couldn't identify the caller. The line had already been compromised by that device by then. Whatever was said, and something was said, the line was open for 4 minutes, we couldn't recover it." I drove home in the morning rain. I never went back to that station. I never told them about the Wednesday calls. I never told them about the nickname. I never told them that on the last call, the week before I found the device, my mother's voice had said something that I dismissed at the time but have not dismissed since. She had said, "I've been trying to reach you for 4 years. I'm glad the line finally held." Nobody is scheduled to clean the building until 7 in the morning. I know the schedule by heart. I've been working nights at the hospital administrative annex for going on 18 months. The cleaning crew, 2 people, a man and a woman, arrive at 7, work until 10, and leave. They are pleasant people. I know their names. I know the sound of their cart, the squeak of its left front wheel, the chemical smell of the solution they mop the floors with. So when I heard a mop bucket being wheeled down the hallway at 4 in the morning, I sat very still at my desk and tried to make sense of it. The annex is a separate building from the main hospital, connected by a covered walkway. It houses billing, records, and administrative offices. At night it is just me. I monitor admissions data, handle overflow calls, and manage the digital records queue. Quiet work in a quiet place. The only sounds at that hour are the rain, the ventilation system, and the distant beeping from the main hospital building carried faintly through the walkway. I heard the cart at 413. The squeak of a wheel. The slosh of liquid in a bucket. The soft, wet sound of a mop being pushed across linoleum. It was coming from the far end of the building, the records corridor, moving slowly toward me. My first thought was that one of the cleaners had come in early. It happens occasionally when they have a heavy schedule. I stood up and looked down the hallway. The corridor was dark. The motion sensor lights had not triggered. The cleaning sounds were coming from a dark hallway. If a person were walking down that hallway, pushing a cart, the motion sensors would have turned the lights on. They are sensitive sensors, they trigger if I walk down there, they trigger when the heat from the ventilation fluctuates, they trigger sometimes for no reason I can identify. They were not triggering now. I called out toward the hallway. Hello? Is someone there? The mopping sound stopped. Silence except for the rain. Then they started again. Same pace. Same direction. Moving toward me. I walked to the hallway entrance and pressed the manual light switch on the wall. The fluorescent lights stuttered on in a slow cascade, section by section down the long corridor. In the sudden light I saw the hallway was empty. The floor was dry. There was no cart, no bucket, no mop, no person. But the sounds continued for 3 or 4 more seconds after the lights came on. As though whatever was making them needed a moment to realize it had been seen. Then silence. I went back to my desk. I called the security line for the main hospital. A guard answered. I told him what I'd heard. He said he'd come check. He arrived 9 minutes later, walked the entire annex with a flashlight, and found nothing. He checked the access logs, no entry had been made to the building since I'd arrived at 11. He told me it was probably sound from the pipes, or from the hospital building traveling through the structure. He was very calm and professional and I could tell he thought I'd spooked myself. After he left, I sat for a while and tried to accept that explanation. Pipes. Building sounds. But I have worked here for 18 months. I know the sounds this building makes. I know every groan and shift and creak of it. What I heard was not pipes. It had direction. It had pace. It moved steadily, at the exact speed of a person pushing a cart. At 4:40, I heard it again. Same corridor. This time I did not call out. I did not turn on the lights. I sat at my desk and listened. The mopping sounds moved down the hallway, reached the junction near my office, and turned. I heard them come closer. Then stop, very close to my door. The light under my office door dimmed slightly, as if something was standing just outside, blocking the strip of hallway light that came through the gap at the bottom. I watched that strip of light under the door. It was blocked for a long time. Long enough that I began counting. I counted slowly and I reached 112 before the light returned to normal. Then I heard the cart sounds again, retreating. Moving back down the hallway, back toward the records corridor. Fading. Gone. In the morning, when the actual cleaners arrived, I asked the woman, Maria, who has worked the annex for 3 years, whether anyone else ever came in early. She said no. I asked if she'd ever heard anything unusual on the early mornings when she arrived. She was quiet for a moment, unwrapping the cord of the vacuum cleaner. Then she said, without looking at me, "You're not the first one to ask that." I asked her what she meant. She said, "The person before you. The young man who did nights before you started. He used to leave notes on the desk." She paused. Notes for the morning shift. Notes about sounds. I asked what happened to him. She said he'd stopped showing up one day. His manager thought he'd quit. They'd found his car in the parking lot 2 days later, unlocked, everything still in it. They never found him. I asked if the police had looked into it. She looked up at me then. She said, "Of course." Then she looked back down at what she was doing. They reviewed the security footage from the night he disappeared. From inside the building. She stopped talking. I asked her what they found on the footage. She said, very quietly, he was sitting at the desk. Right where you sit. And then he stood up and walked down the hallway. She paused. And he never came back to the desk. I asked if they could see what he was walking toward. She nodded slowly. She said, there was nothing in the hallway when he walked into it. Nothing visible. Another pause. But the way he walked. The footage, his manager showed me once. He walked the way you walk toward someone you know. Someone you've been waiting to see. She looked at me one more time. He was walking like he was glad something was finally there. I gave my notice that afternoon. I cleaned out the desk. I carried my things to my car. In the parking lot I stood in the morning rain and told myself I was being irrational. I told myself the sounds were structural and the woman's story was exaggerated and the missing man had simply walked out and driven away and started somewhere new. I drove home. I went to sleep. I dreamed of a long dark hallway and the sound of a cart with a squeaking wheel and the feeling that something on the other side of a door had been waiting there for a very long time, perfectly still, listening to me breathe. When I woke up, there was mud on my shoes. My shoes that I had not worn since I got home. The man who had my job before me killed himself in this building. They didn't tell me that when I was hired. I found out 6 weeks in, the way you find out things nobody wants to tell you, by accident, through a small crack in someone's carelessness. A coworker let it slip in a parking lot conversation, then went pale and changed the subject. I let it go at the time. But then I found the schedule. It was in a desk drawer, tucked under a phone book from 4 years ago, which is itself an unusual thing to find. A handwritten schedule on 3-hole punched notebook paper, a night guard's checklist for hourly rounds. Methodical, careful handwriting, the kind of handwriting that belongs to a precise, orderly person. Each line had a time, a location, and a checkbox. The times went from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. At the bottom of the page, below the final 5 a.m. entry, something else was written. Not in the same careful handwriting, this was hurried, pressed hard into the paper. It said, "Don't check the east stairwell after 3. I was sitting at the security desk in the lobby of a 6-story municipal records building. Old building, built in the 50s, very little renovated since then. Marble floors that amplified every footstep. Fluorescent lights that hummed at a pitch just at the edge of perception. 6 floors of archived records, property deeds, court documents, tax records going back to the city's founding. Nobody came here much anymore, most things were being digitized, but the physical record still existed and still needed to be protected. The east stairwell was one of 3 stairwells in the building. I had been using it regularly for 6 weeks. I had never had any particular feeling about it. But that note. Don't check the east stairwell after 3. That night I did my rounds as usual up until 3 in the morning. I checked each floor on the hour, tried each door, made sure no windows had been left open, signed the log. I used all 3 stairwells. I went past the entrance to the east stairwell on every floor without incident. At 3:05, I started toward the east stairwell on the 4th floor. And I stopped. I don't have a good explanation for why I stopped. It was not a decision exactly. It was more physical than that, a tightening, a stillness that came over me the way it comes over prey animals when something shifts in their environment. I stood in the hallway outside the east stairwell door and I did not go in. I used the west stairwell to come down. I finished my rounds. I went back to the desk. I read the note again. Don't check the east stairwell after 3. I thought about the man who'd written it. I thought about how carefully he'd made that schedule, how neat his handwriting was everywhere else on the page, and how different that final note looked, frantic, pressed deep, like something written quickly under duress. Like something written by a person who had just learned something. I found his name through the building's administrative contact. I looked him up. The information was spare and terrible: a man in his 50s, no family, found in the building by the morning shift. The official report said he'd fallen from the 6th floor of the east stairwell. The word used was fell, which is sometimes a careful word, used in place of other words. After that night I developed a habit. Every night, when 3 o'clock passed, I stayed at the desk. I did not go into the east stairwell. I told myself this was rational behavior based on legitimate historical information. But on the 43rd night of my employment, something happened that I have never been able to explain away. It was 3:20. Raining. I was at the desk, reading. And I heard footsteps in the east stairwell. The east stairwell is directly accessible from the lobby. Its door is 30 feet from my desk. The footsteps were going up, I could tell by the sound's direction, one flight, then another, then another. Even, slow, deliberate. A person climbing stairs in no hurry. I sat very still and listened to the footsteps climb all 6 floors. Then I heard them above me, not in the stairwell anymore, but on the floor. The 6th floor. Walking. I did not go up. I sat at the desk. The footsteps on the 6th floor walked slowly from one end of the building to the other. The 6th floor is approximately 200 feet long. The footsteps took a long time, and they stopped at what I estimated was the east end of the building, directly above the east stairwell landing. They stopped there and did not move again. I reviewed the building's access records in the morning. No entry had been logged after my arrival. I reviewed the stairwell camera on the 6th floor. The camera covers the landing. The footage showed nothing, no person, no movement, for the entire shift. But on the lobby camera, which angles toward the east stairwell door, something appeared on the footage at 3:23. The stairwell door, which opens outward into the lobby, moved. Just slightly. It moved inward, pressed from the lobby side, as if someone on the lobby side was pressing it toward the stairwell. The door opened 3 or 4 inches and held there for almost 2 minutes. Then it closed. I was not near the door at that time. The footage showed me at the desk, 40 feet away, not moving. Nothing came through that door. Nothing visible went through it. But something caused it to open. Something on the lobby side pressed it inward, held it, and let it close. Something that the camera could not see. I found one more thing when I cleaned out that desk on my last night. Behind the phone book, further back in the drawer than the schedule had been, a second piece of notebook paper, same handwriting, same careful precision. It was a list of dates. About 30 of them, going back 5 years. Next to each date was a time. Every time was between 3 and 4 in the morning. And next to each time, the same 2 words, written over and over down the page: it climbed. I noticed it first in the window by the break room. The window faces the parking lot. At night the lot is empty and dark and the window acts as a mirror. You can see your own reflection perfectly against the blackness outside. I'd passed that window hundreds of times on night shift without paying it much attention. But that night I walked past it and stopped. Because my reflection did not stop when I did. It kept walking for 2 or 3 more steps before it halted. As though it hadn't noticed I'd stopped. As though it was operating with a slight delay. I work night shift at a large retail distribution center, a vast, single-story building where goods are sorted and staged for delivery. Concrete floors, industrial shelving, loading bays, and a small employee area with a break room, 2 bathrooms, and a manager's office I use as my desk station. The building is over 300,000 square feet. At night it is me, the hum of the refrigeration units, the rain on the skylights, and very little else. I stared at my reflection in the break room window. My reflection stared back. I raised my right hand slowly. My reflection raised its hand, slowly, matching me, normally. I lowered my hand. It lowered its hand. I told myself I had imagined the delay. I was tired. It was almost 2 in the morning. I walked back to the manager's office and sat down. An hour later I walked past the window again. This time I stopped abruptly, without warning, mid-stride. My reflection took 4 full steps before it stopped. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. It walked forward in the reflection, into where the break room wall should have been, and then stopped and turned and looked at me. 4 steps. At least 3 seconds of delay. I am not a person who panics. I work alone in a very large building in the middle of the night, and I have been doing it for 4 years. I have made peace with darkness and strange sounds and the way isolation can warp your perception of things. I examined the window carefully, the glass, the angle, the lighting, and I could not find an explanation. The window was ordinary. There was no second pane of glass, no trick of reflection. It was just a window. I avoided the window for the rest of that night. The following night I brought a small hand mirror from home. At 2 in the morning I stood in the break room and held the mirror up. I moved the mirror quickly to one side. The reflection moved, but not correctly. The hand in the mirror moved the mirror, yes, but its face. Its face turned toward me in the mirror a half second after mine should have. And when it turned, the expression was not blank. The expression was something I struggled to describe. It was attentive. It was the expression of something listening very carefully, that had just been caught listening. I set the mirror face down on the break room table. I went back to the office and locked the door. I sat there until morning. For the next 3 weeks I kept a log. Every night I tested the reflection in the window. The delay was consistent, always between 2 and 5 seconds. Always present. And over those 3 weeks, something else began to change. The reflection began to do things I hadn't done. Small things at first. I would walk past and it would turn to look at something behind me, something in the reflected break room, that I had not looked at. I would stop and it would tilt its head, which I had not tilted. Once, I walked past and it was not moving at all. Just standing, facing forward, while I moved. Standing very still in the reflection, watching me pass. In the 4th week, I came to the window and the reflection was not where it should have been. I was standing directly in front of the window. My reflection should have been directly opposite me. Instead it was off to the left. As though it was standing 4 or 5 feet away from where I was standing, at a different position in the break room that wasn't mine. I raised my hand. After the usual delay, the reflection raised its hand, but it raised the wrong hand. I had raised my right hand. It raised its left hand. Not the mirror image of my right hand, which would also be left. It raised its left hand as if it were raising its own left hand. As if it were a separate person choosing to match me rather than a reflection compelled to. I ran my hand over my face. It watched me do it. Then it did it too, after a pause. But not the same movement. A different version of the movement. Its own version. I called in sick the next 2 nights. When I came back on the 3rd night, I made myself go to the break room window immediately. My reflection was already there. It was standing at the window before I reached it. I rounded the corner and saw it there, standing, looking back at me from across the glass. Already waiting. Already in position. It had been standing there alone, in the empty reflection of the break room, before I arrived. When I stepped in front of it, we looked at each other. Neither of us moved for a long time. Then it turned and walked away. Into the reflected break room, away from the window, across the space, and around a corner that in the real break room leads to the hallway. I stood and watched it go. Then I turned around. The break room behind me was empty. But the door to the hallway, the door the reflection had just walked toward in the mirror, was slowly closing. As though someone had just walked through it. The latch clicked softly into place. And down the hallway, just audible over the rain and the hum of the refrigeration units, I heard footsteps. Walking away from me. Walking deeper into the building. The last entry in the visitor log was dated the night before I started. I noticed it during my first week. I was reviewing the logs as part of my orientation, learning the systems, checking the procedures. The visitor log for the building sits at the front desk of the archive facility where I work. It is a standard sign-in book, visitor name, time in, time out, purpose of visit, signature. The last entry was written in a thin, slightly unsteady hand. The visitor's name was listed as a single initial, M, the time in was 11:45 p.m. The purpose of visit was listed as, returning something, the timeout was blank. No departure time. No signature. I asked my supervisor about it. He looked at the entry for a moment and then said he didn't know who it was, that sometimes vendors or contractors came by after hours and the log wasn't always completed properly. He closed the book. But returning something stayed with me. This is a private archive facility. We store documents and artifacts for individuals and small institutions, personal collections, private records, sealed estates. Much of what is here is unique. Some of it is old. You are not supposed to remove anything without formal authorization, which means you are not supposed to return anything informally either. The phrase was wrong. It didn't fit the context. It was the kind of phrase someone writes when they don't want to write the real phrase. I work alone, Sunday through Thursday, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The facility is 3 floors of climate-controlled storage and a basement of older materials. Above ground it looks like a plain commercial building. Inside it smells like old paper and something underneath that, something mineral and faintly damp despite the climate controls. On my 3rd week, I found something in the basement that wasn't on any inventory list. I was doing the weekly physical check of the basement collection when I found a wooden box on a shelf in the back section, in an area that the inventory listed as empty. The box was old, I'm not qualified to say how old, but the wood had the weight and density of something that had been sitting still for a very long time. It was latched, not locked. A simple brass latch. I did not open it. I documented it and reported it to my supervisor in the morning. He said he'd look into it. He did not seem particularly concerned. 2 weeks later, the box was still there. I asked about it again. My supervisor said it was being reviewed and I should leave it where it was. The following Sunday night, at 11:50, someone knocked on the front door of the facility. This should not happen. The facility's street address is not public. Visitors require appointments and arrive in the daytime. I am not authorized to allow entry to anyone who has not been pre-approved in the system. I went to the front door. Through the reinforced glass panel I could see a person standing outside in the rain. Older, I couldn't determine the age precisely through the rain and the dark, wearing a long coat, holding nothing. No umbrella. Standing in the rain as though the rain were not happening. I asked through the door who they were and what they wanted. They said, I came to finish what I started. I left something here that wasn't mine to leave. I'd like to take it back. I said I could not allow entry without authorization. They said, you found the box. I know you found it. I put it there a long time ago and I've been trying to get back to it since. I asked how long ago. They said, long enough that the person who ran this place then is gone now. Long enough that you won't find my name in anything that's current. I looked at them through the glass. The rain was very heavy. The person stood in it without any sign of discomfort. I said, I can take your information and pass it to the director. That's all I can do." They were quiet for a moment. Then they said, "The box should not be opened. Whatever you do, don't let anyone open the box. I put it there to contain something, not to store it. There's a difference." It was a decision made out of necessity, and I have spent a great deal of time regretting the location. I asked what was in the box. They looked at me through the glass. Not at my face exactly. Slightly to the side of my face. Like they were looking at something just over my shoulder. They said, "What I put in there doesn't have a name I know how to say. I found it in a place where it shouldn't have been, and I made a mistake in thinking I could contain it instead of destroying it. By the time I understood my mistake, I couldn't get back in to fix it." I asked why they couldn't get back in. They said, "The last time I came, the night guard wouldn't let me in either. I've been trying for years. I keep coming back, but something keeps preventing me from reaching the box." I said, "You signed the log. There's an entry. Initial M, returning something." They stopped. Long pause. Then they said, "That wasn't this visit. That was the visit I told you about. The last time I was let inside." Another pause. "That was 11 years ago." I looked down at the visitor log on the desk. The date I'd seen was in the book my supervisor had handed me as part of orientation, the current log, for the current year. The entry with the initial M and the blank departure time had been in the current book. The date had been the night before my start date. Current book. Current year. 11 days ago. I looked back through the glass. The person was gone. The rain came down on an empty doorstep. No footsteps in the wet. No movement in the parking lot. Nothing. I went down to the basement. I went to the back section. I went to the shelf where the wooden box had been sitting for 3 weeks. The latch was open. The box was empty. And on the shelf beside it, resting on the wood, was something I cannot account for and have never been able to explain, a single sheet of paper, dry despite the damp of the basement, covered in handwriting I recognized. The same thin, slightly unsteady handwriting from the visitor log. The paper said, "I came back." It was already gone. I don't know when it left. I don't know where it went. But you should know that it knows this building now. It knows every room. And it has been here, with you, every night since the box was found and someone got close enough to wake it up, *. At the bottom of the page, one more line. *I'm sorry. I'm sorry it was your hands that opened it, *. I had not opened the box. I was certain of that. I had found it, documented it, and walked away. But standing in the basement with that paper in my hands, I tried to remember the exact moment I'd found the box. I tried to reconstruct it precisely. I remembered seeing it on the shelf. I remembered reaching for it. I remembered the weight of it. The brass latch. And I could not remember, no matter how hard I tried, whether the latch had been open or closed when my hand first touched it. I could not remember whether I had opened it. And in that uncertainty, standing in the basement of a building I was alone in the deepest hours of a rainy night, I understood that the not knowing was the point. That something had arranged for me to not know. That whatever had been inside that box had made sure that I would never be certain whether I had let it out. So that I would never be certain what I was responsible for. So that I would carry that uncertainty. And it would have company.